If grief had a sound, it would be the quiet clink of dishes being washed alone on a child's birthday. The morning of Sarah's 6th birthday began like any other Thursday, too early, too gray, too quiet. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of stillness that presses on your lungs and makes you forget how to breathe. I stood by the window, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, watching the neighbors' kids pile into a car full of balloons. Someone laughed. Somewhere, a cake was being boxed up. Somewhere, a grandmother was being celebrated for raising the next generation. But that grandmother wasn't me. The sun filtered in through the blinds, catching the dust that floated like tired stars in morning light. I stared at the phone on the counter, half expecting it to buzz, to light up, to do something. Maybe it would be her voice, Sarah's soft little whisper, "Grandma Nora, can you come to my party?" Or even just a text from my son, Jason. "Come by at noon, Mom. She wants to see you." Nothing. I'd known this day would come in a way. There were signs. You learn to read them when you've spent a lifetime piecing people back together, first in the ER and then in your own home. The change in tone, the long pauses, the subtle "we" instead of "you." And finally, no mention at all. But knowing doesn't make it easier. It only makes it harder to pretend you didn't see it coming. 5 years ago, I took Sarah into my arms when she was barely walking. Her mother, Jason's then girlfriend, now long disappeared, had left in the middle of a Tuesday, diaper bag untouched, crib sheets damp from an accident, and a post-it note on the fridge that simply said, "I can't do this." Jason had been working 2 jobs, sleeping in his car some nights. He showed up at my porch, eyes red, baby in arms, shoulders collapsing. "Just a little while, Mom," he'd said, "until I figure it out." And I did what any mother does. I opened the door wider. From that day forward, Sarah was mine in every way that mattered. I traded my retirement dream of coastal trips and watercolor classes for booster seats, night terrors, and preschool pickups. I made peace with watching cartoons at 6 in the morning and reheating coffee 3 times before finishing it once. I learned the names of every stuffed animal. I celebrated small triumphs, no accidents for a week, her first drawing of us, the time she finally said, "I love you," without being prompted. It wasn't sacrifice. It was love. Quiet, unflinching, endless love. So you understand why, this morning, the silence felt like betrayal. I walked to the kitchen and wiped down a counter that didn't need cleaning. I rearranged the magnets on the fridge. I opened the pantry and stared at the box of cake mix I'd bought, just in case they changed their minds. The candle with the number 6 still sat unopened in the drawer, its plastic packaging mocking me. I remembered her last birthday. I'd made the cake myself, chocolate her favorite. She'd helped crack the eggs and spilled half the flour on the floor. We danced to old Motown records in our socks. She wore a tiara made from foil and tape, and I wore one too. When we blew out the candles, she made a wish she refused to tell me. Now I wonder if that wish had already been slipping away from me. Because since the day Jason married Hannah, his new wife, with her perfect handwriting and her Pinterest boards, things began to shift, subtly, smoothly, like a house being lifted from its foundation inch by inch. You don't hear the creak until the walls start cracking. It started with small corrections. "Actually, Nora, we don't give her juice anymore." Or, "Oh, she doesn't nap in the afternoon now." Then came the new routines I wasn't told about, the play dates I wasn't invited to, The parent-teacher meetings I no longer got the emails for. I was becoming a shadow in a house I'd helped rebuild. And now a ghost in the life I once nurtured with my every breath. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't expect medals or Mother's Day cards, but I thought I'd at least be invited to the party. I thought there'd be a chair for me, maybe in the back, maybe not with the rest of the guests, but somewhere. Instead, all I had was this silence, this empty kitchen, this box of cake mix for no one. The mail slid through the slot in the door with a dull thud. I walked over, half hopeful, half resentful, bills, coupons, and one glossy postcard with a unicorn on the front, a birthday party invitation to Miss Sarah Andrews from Mommy and Daddy. We're having a magical birthday bash, Saturday at 3 p.m. RSVP only, please. No mention of me. No return address. I flipped it over, hoping for handwriting, something human. But it was machine-printed, impersonal, disposable. That was when the tears came. Not the loud kind, the kind that just appear. One blink and they're there, sliding down without permission. I crumpled the postcard slowly, pressing it in my palm until it cut. Then I threw it in the trash, not because I was angry, but because I was done pretending I wasn't hurt. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where I used to read to Sarah, where we colored in books and learned to count to 100. The same table where I'd waited all morning, as if love alone could summon an invitation. I didn't get one, but I still had my story, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start telling it. They say your life doesn't change in a moment. It changes in the moments you don't recognize until much later. The day Jason left Sarah on my porch, I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready. But I didn't hesitate. That's what I remember most. Not the panic, not the questions. Just my hands reaching out before my mind even caught up. She was crying, red-faced, fists balled into tight little knots, like she already knew the world was unfair and was bracing herself for it. Jason looked like a man unraveling. His hoodie was stained with something dark. Formula, maybe coffee, maybe regret. He didn't come inside right away, just stood there rocking on his heels while I cradled the child. "I have to get to work," he mumbled. "I've got a shift in 20. I opened my mouth to ask something, anything, but closed it again. He kissed Sarah's forehead, and just like that, he was gone. A cloud of dust trailed after his rusted Corolla as it peeled down the road. I remember standing there, barefoot on the cold porch, baby pressed to my chest, the weight of something far bigger than both of us settling into my arms. Sarah was 14 months old. Her mother, Kayla, had disappeared a few weeks earlier, leaving behind only a text, "I'm not cut out for this. Tell her I'm sorry when she's old enough to care." I never did. Some truths are better left buried until a child can armor themselves against them. That night, Sarah slept in the laundry basket beside my bed, cushioned with soft towels. I hadn't set up the old crib yet, hadn't even unpacked it from the garage, but she didn't complain. She whimpered once, then fell asleep to the rhythm of my breathing, our lives beginning again without ceremony. In the weeks that followed, I remembered how to do things I hadn't done in decades. Bottles, teething gel, lullabies I hadn't sung since Jason was small. The house changed. I moved the breakables higher. I turned the second bedroom into a nursery. I traded my sofa for one with stain-resistant fabric. I put child locks on every cabinet. I gave up late-night television and wine with dinner. I stopped going to book club. I learned which diapers didn't leak and which baby food made her gag. I discovered that silence could mean mischief or sleep, and you never knew which until it was too late. But for every bit of chaos, there was something else, something quieter. The first time she called me Mama was an accident, I think. I was holding her after a nap, her head nestled into the crook of my neck, and she whispered it, barely audible. I froze. She didn't say it again that day, but I heard it, felt it. I never corrected her. Jason came by every few days. Sometimes he stayed for dinner. Sometimes he brought groceries. He tried, I'll give him that. But his life was a shipwreck he hadn't learned to swim from yet, and I wasn't about to throw Sarah into those waters. So I steadied the boat for all of us. Months turned into years. Sarah grew fast. She was smart and silly and stubborn. She liked jelly on both sides of her toast. She thought clouds were made of sugar. She believed Band-Aids could heal anything. She would ask me every night if I would still be there in the morning. Always, I'd say. Always, baby. When she started preschool, I was the one holding her hand at drop-off, the one filling out emergency contact forms, the one making turkey and cheese roll-ups that came back half-eaten, but with little thank you notes in crayon. On Mother's Day that year, she gave me a card with a handprint and a scribble. To my best, Mama. I still keep it in my wallet. No one told me I wasn't her mother. No one had to. But for those 5 years, I was the only mother she knew. The only one who'd shown up, who stayed, who remembered what she looked like when she slept, and which side she liked her toast crusts cut. And I never asked for the title, but I earned it. Jason got better, sort of. He met Hannah, a woman with plans and polished nails, and an MBA in fixing. She was warm at first. She thanked me, said things like, "I don't know how you did it." She brought scented candles as gifts and offered to lighten the load, but I saw it early. The gentle reshaping. She called me Nora instead of Mom. She introduced me to friends as Jason's mother, rather than Sarah's grandmother. She began to redo things I'd already done, reorganizing the fridge, repacking the diaper bag, updating Sarah's bedtime routine. They moved into a townhouse across town. I still watched Sarah during the day, picked her up from pre-K, handled snacks and scraped knees and sudden fevers. But the drop-offs got shorter. The thanks got quieter. The looks got longer, as if I was overstaying an invitation I didn't remember accepting. Still, I stayed silent, because love, when it's real, doesn't keep score. Then came the call about custody. Hannah said it lightly, like it was no big deal. "We're going to make things official. It's better for school enrollment. You understand, right?" I said yes, because what else was I supposed to say? They filed for full custody, Jason's name, Hannah's signature, no mention of me. The judge didn't blink. And that's when the crib became a relic. That's when I stopped packing snacks, stopped brushing tangles from Sarah's hair, stopped being the one she ran to when she scraped her knees. That's when I stopped being needed, but not when I stopped loving her. That never stopped. Even now, on the day of her birthday, even after the silence, even after being erased, I still love her. And that's the kind of ache no one sends a card for. I didn't know that exhaustion could settle so deep into your bones that even sleep couldn't shake it loose. Those first few years of raising Sarah weren't just hard. They were a slow erosion of energy, of time, of the woman I used to be. At 58, I was supposed to be easing into something softer. Not retired, no, but less frantic. I had plans, small ones, gardening, volunteering at the library, maybe a little road trip up the coast in my beat-up Ford. I had earned the right to gentleness. Instead, I was making bottles at 2 a.m. with arthritic hands and folding miniature socks, with eyes that could barely see the tags anymore. I kept baby wipes in my purse, cereal puffs in the glove compartment. My grocery lists shifted from quinoa and wine to teething biscuits and Pedialyte, and the hospital didn't stop needing me. 3 nights a week, I pulled 12-hour shifts at the ER. I had to. The bills didn't disappear just because the love in the house changed shape. My insurance barely covered my own prescriptions, let alone the endless doctor visits, ear infections, and pediatrician copays. And Jason, he tried, but inconsistency was his constant. So I became the anchor. I remember one night in particular. I'd just finished a double shift. My back felt like it had been twisted into a pretzel, and my feet were screaming inside shoes 2 sizes too old. I pulled into the driveway and could already hear Sarah crying from the curb. Jason was asleep on the couch. There were dirty dishes stacked in the sink, a bottle spilled across the counter. The diaper bag lay open, half empty, like a symbol of everything incomplete in that house. I didn't yell, I didn't sigh. I just picked her up, changed her diaper, held her until she stopped shaking. That was the rhythm: work, care, repeat. Some nights I forgot to eat. Others I'd cry into my scrambled eggs at 4 a.m., not because I regretted it, but because I didn't know how I'd make it through the next day. I stopped seeing friends. I missed weddings, funerals. My book club sent me texts I never answered. The neighbors stopped knocking. Even the postman eventually learned to leave packages by the door without ringing the bell. But Sarah thrived. She learned her colors early, could count to 20 before age 3. She liked puzzles, the hard ones. She'd scrunch her tiny eyebrows in focus, tongue poking out, until the pieces snapped into place with quiet little clicks. Her favorite was the solar system. She insisted on calling Jupiter Juicy Pear, and I never corrected her. Every time she learned something new, I felt like I had climbed a mountain no one else could see. That was my reward. Love without applause, sacrifice without audience. But even love like that takes a toll. I began forgetting things, small things at first. The oven left on, the laundry soured overnight. I once arrived at work wearing 2 different shoes. My coworkers laughed gently, but I saw the concern behind their eyes. I wasn't falling apart. I was stretching too thin. I was giving every drop of myself away. At my annual checkup, my doctor gently asked me if I was depressed. I told her I didn't have time to be. She didn't laugh. "You need rest, Nora," she said. "Not just sleep, rest." I nodded like I understood. But how do you rest when the thing you're holding might fall if you dare loosen your grip? I drank more coffee. I skipped more meals. I told myself I'd rest when Sarah started school, when Jason got stable, when life evened out. But it never did. It just kept demanding more. One evening, Sarah fell off the porch steps. Nothing serious, just a scraped elbow. But she screamed like the world was ending. I rushed over, heart pounding. As I held her close, trying to soothe her, I realized my hands were trembling. Not from fear, from fatigue. That's when I knew something had to change. Not for me, but for her. Because if I broke, who would carry her? So I started saying no to extra shifts, to last-minute favors, to things that chipped away at the slivers of energy I had left. I carved out time, small pockets, 10 minutes to sit on the porch, a hot bath on Fridays, a single cup of tea before anyone else woke up. I even pulled out my old journals, wrote 3 lines a night, sometimes nonsense, sometimes prayer. And in those moments, I remembered who I was before I became just the caretaker. A woman who once danced barefoot in her kitchen, who loved Nina Simone, who had dreams of learning to paint. I hadn't disappeared, I'd just been waiting, and Sarah, she noticed. One day, she brought me a picture she'd drawn in crayon. It was me sitting in a chair with a sun above my head. In shaky letters, she'd written, "Mama makes the sun rise." I almost wept, because in all the noise, all the diapers and deadlines and dimming light, she still saw me. Not the tired version, not the fading woman, but the sun. And that was enough to keep going. Until the world decided I wasn't needed anymore. There are betrayals that come with noise, screaming matches, slammed doors, shattered glass. And then there are the quiet ones, like a birthday invitation that never arrives. It began with a whisper of change, small things. Hannah started picking Sarah up directly from school instead of me. Jason stopped texting to confirm weekend visits. One time, I showed up with cupcakes for Sarah's class. Vanilla with rainbow sprinkles, her favorite, but the teacher gently informed me that only parents or guardians were permitted to deliver treats. Guardians. I nodded, held my breath, and walked back to my car. Inside, the cupcakes stayed intact, untouched, like the part of me I kept saving for Sarah, even when no one asked. At home, I sat at the kitchen table and ate one, slowly. It tasted like memories I wasn't allowed to hold on to. A week later, I found out about the party. Not from Jason, not even from Sarah, but from a mutual friend's granddaughter who still attended Sarah's school. "Are you going to Sarah's birthday?" she asked, swinging her feet from the edge of my porch. "It's at that trampoline place. My mom says it's going to be huge." I smiled and excused myself to bring out lemonade, and then I cried behind the kitchen door. That night, I checked the mail 3 times, hoping maybe it had been delayed. Maybe they'd forgotten. Maybe, just maybe, it was a mistake. It wasn't. The silence was too deliberate. I texted Jason, "Hey, will there be a small family thing for Sarah's birthday? Would love to drop by with a gift." He didn't respond. 2 days later, I tried again. This time, more casual. "Hope the party goes well. Let Sarah know I'm thinking of her." Still nothing. On the day of her birthday, I wore my good blouse, the one with the blue floral trim she always liked. I even wrapped the gift I'd been hiding for months, a watercolor set with real brushes, not the plastic kind. Sarah had always loved painting, but I didn't deliver it. Instead, I sat by the window and watched the sun drift across the living room floor, slow and indifferent. I imagined the bounce house, the cake, the little girls in tutus and glitter sneakers. And somewhere in that picture, Sarah, laughing, happy. But without me, I tried not to imagine who helped her open the presents, who tied her hair with ribbons, who stood behind her when she blew out the candles. I told myself it didn't matter, that birthdays were just days, that love couldn't be erased with balloons and streamers. But oh, how it hurt, worse than any fight, more cutting than words, because this wasn't anger, it was erasure, a lasso, ud varias el tunes. I was no longer useful, no longer part of the new glossy picture they were painting. I didn't fit, not in the party, not in the pickup line, not in the life I had helped build with trembling hands and sleepless nights. Later that evening, I placed the wrapped gift on the shelf beside Sarah's old drawings. the ones with Mama scribbled in crayon with too many hearts and a sun in every corner. And I whispered, to no one in particular, "I didn't forget you." That was all I had left to offer, not presents, but remembrance. The next morning, I got a text from Jason, one line. "Hey Mom, sorry about the party, things got hectic." That was it. Not an invitation, not an apology. Just a bland dismissal of a 5-year devotion, like it was a misplaced grocery list. I typed out 12 different replies, angry ones, heartbroken ones. One that simply read, "How could you?" But I never hit send. Instead, I turned off my phone, stepped out into the morning light, and took a long walk. Because if the world was going to shrink around me, I would carve space in it where I could still breathe. And in that moment, I remembered something vital. Love can't be revoked by omission. And grief isn't just about losing someone. It's also about being told you were never truly part of their story to begin with. The next time I visited Jason's house, I noticed it right away. The wall. The one near the staircase that used to be cluttered with mismatched frames. Pictures of Sarah's first toothless smile. A Halloween shot where I wore a witch's hat just to make her laugh. A blurry candid of her asleep in my arms. The night after her fever broke, gone, replaced with a new arrangement, curated, clean. Every photo neatly framed in silver and white. A Pinterest-perfect family timeline, but I wasn't in any of them, not a single one. I walked past it slowly, pretending not to look, my hands clenched in my coat pockets, but my eyes didn't lie. They scanned every corner, every smile, every birthday and milestone. Jason holding Sarah on her first day of school. Hannah braiding her hair at a picnic. Sarah alone, but carefully dressed, posed, positioned, edited. It was as if someone had gone through the archives and plucked me out frame by frame. As if love could be deleted with a mouse click and a fresh coat of paint. I stood there, halfway up the stairs, and felt the sting rise in my throat. I wanted to believe it was an accident, a simple redecorating. Maybe they'd moved the old frames to another room. Maybe, but no. That wall was intentional. And so was my absence. I stayed for dinner that night because Sarah asked me to. Her voice still held warmth, still laced with the kind of love that doesn't yet understand betrayal. She showed me her new backpack, drew me a picture of a purple house with yellow windows. She hugged me twice, too tightly for someone who supposedly didn't miss me. Jason barely looked me in the eye. Hannah smiled with lips that didn't quite reach her cheeks. I ate the casserole, complimented the seasoning, offered to help with dishes. They declined. When I left, Sarah waved from the doorway, still in her socks. "Bye-bye, Mama," she said. "Love you." My knees buckled when I got to the car, because that word, Mama, used to be mine. She gave it to me before she could even pronounce Grandma. I never corrected her. I wore that title like a badge, earned it, fought for it, bled for it, and now they were quietly taking it back. Not with drama, not with cruelty, but with calculated distance. I drove home in silence, the streets dim and unkind. My hands gripped the wheel too tightly. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't want noise. I wanted to scream. But what would I scream about? That I wasn't on the wall? That they celebrated her birthday without me? That the child I raised now lived in a house where my name was being erased? None of it would sound like enough. It would sound petty, small. But grief doesn't need to be grand to be real. Sometimes it's as quiet as a missing photograph, as subtle as a name never spoken. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood in front of my own hallway, my gallery. Fewer frames, less polished, but each one real. There we were, Sarah in the wading pool at 3. Sarah and I at the zoo, both covered in melted ice cream. Sarah asleep on my chest, her little hand tucked into my collar. Proof that I existed, that I mattered. I ran my fingers along one frame, tracing the edge like it might dissolve without me. And I whispered, "You were here. I was here." They couldn't erase the past, but they could try to outgrow it. And that was the cruelest cut of all, that even love, when left to weather too long in someone else's house, could be boxed up and donated like old furniture. Later that night, I pulled out a notebook, not to journal, but to list dates, moments, milestones. The little things only I would remember. Her first step, October 17th on the bath mat, slippery socks. The time she called broccoli green trees and refused to eat them unless they made a jungle on her plate. The night she had a night terror and only calmed down when I sang the lullaby my mother used to sing to me. I wrote them down like gospel, because someone had to remember. And it was clear now, it wouldn't be Jason. It came quietly, like most endings do, not with thunder, but with stillness. I was folding laundry when I realized I hadn't seen Sarah in almost 2 months. Not a visit, not a call, not a photo message or crayon drawing. Just silence, like I'd slipped through the cracks of my own family's life. The last time I texted Jason, he replied a day later with, "Things are just really busy right now, Mom. We'll try to stop by soon." Try, as if I were an errand. A chore to be penciled in between soccer practice and grocery runs. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it, not in anger, but in surrender, because I finally understood. I had been holding out hope for something that wasn't coming. They weren't forgetting me. They were phasing me out, softly, politely, like one might do with an outdated appliance, too bulky for the space, too worn to fit the new aesthetic. I spent that entire afternoon scrubbing the kitchen, not because it was dirty, because I needed to move, to feel like I still had control over something. I dusted shelves that didn't need dusting, reorganized the pantry, refolded already neat dish towels. But when I got to the spare room, Sarah's old room, I stopped. Everything was as it was. The pink sheets, the plush dolphin, the small bookshelf filled with dog-eared fairy tales. It was frozen in time, untouched since the last sleepover months ago. Her toothbrush still in the holder. The little socks she always forgot, still tucked in the drawer. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the tiny handprint painting on the wall. To Mama, Love Sarah, made with finger paint and sealed with a glittery sticker. The air felt heavy in my lungs, so I made a decision. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, sat down at the table, and I wrote a letter. Not to Jason, not even to Sarah, to myself. A declaration. I wrote, "You showed up every day. You woke before dawn to warm bottles. You learned lullabies you hadn't sung in 30 years. You held a crying child through fevers and nightmares and scraped knees. You made her feel safe. You gave 5 years of your life, not because you had to, but because love demanded it. And now they pretend it never happened. But you were there, and that is enough." I folded the paper carefully and slipped it between the pages of my favorite novel. A quiet place for a quiet truth. That night, I didn't text Jason. I didn't call. I didn't ask when I'd see Sarah again. I stopped Because love is not a petition. It is not something to be proven again and again, weighed against convenience. It just is, or it isn't. And theirs had become conditional, contingent on silence, on my not interfering, on my willingness to shrink. But I am done shrinking. That weekend, I cleared Sarah's room, not in bitterness, in peace. I folded the sheets, packed her toys into labeled boxes. I kept the little handprint painting and one of her favorite books, just one. The rest I donated to a shelter. I turned the room into a small studio, nothing fancy. Just a table, a lamp, and a wall of paints I hadn't touched in years. I began to paint again, landscapes at first, then quiet faces. Then one afternoon, I painted a small girl running barefoot through a field. A ribbon trailing from her braid. It looked like Sarah. But the sky was darkening in the background, and the ribbon, scarlet, was unraveling. I didn't know what it meant, but I hung it anyway, let it watch over me while I painted and remembered. Because maybe that's all I had now, memories and brush strokes. But they were mine, untouchable, undeniable, and I was done waiting to be invited. Done knocking on locked doors, hoping someone remembered to love me back. From now on, I would only go where I was welcomed, even if that place was the quiet corner of my own home, even if it meant loving Sarah from afar. She would grow, she might forget, she might call someone else Mama. But I knew the truth, and I had no more room for begging in my chest. Only space for breath, and the sound of my own voice saying, finally, enough. It was early spring when I realized the day was coming. Sarah's birthday, March 14th. I'd marked it on every calendar for the past 6 years. It had always been a celebration I planned with joy, with balloons bought weeks in advance, and handmade cupcakes she would cover in too many sprinkles. But this year was different. I hadn't heard a word, no call, no text, no, "We're doing something small this year, hope you can make it." Just silence. At first, I made excuses for them. They're busy. Maybe they're planning a surprise. Maybe Sarah's party will be low-key this year. But as the date crept closer, I knew the invitation wasn't coming. And worse, they didn't even think to pretend. It was a Thursday when I saw the Facebook post. Hannah had tagged Jason in a photo, Sarah in a glittering pink dress, standing beside a 3-tiered cake. Streamers behind her, a crown on her head, and 24 guests surrounding her in their Sunday best. Smiles everywhere, except mine. I wasn't there, I wasn't mentioned, I wasn't even tagged in the album. No one asked where I was, no one seemed to notice. I stared at the screen so long that the image blurred. My breath caught in my chest, not because of the party, but because of the look in Sarah's eyes. She looked happy, radiant, untroubled. And for a terrifying moment, I wondered, had she even noticed I wasn't there? Had they trained her to forget me? Or worse, to not need me? I shut the laptop gently. Then I went to the spare room, my new studio, and sat down. I didn't cry, not at first. I pulled out a canvas, but my hands wouldn't move. The brush hovered above the blank surface, but my mind was too loud. The memories flooded in. The first birthday party we ever threw for her, when she was just turning 2. She'd smashed her hand into the cake and looked at me like she was asking if that was allowed. I laughed so hard I cried. Back then, she had clung to me with every breath, her little hands always finding mine, her voice calling me Mama like it was her first word, not her mistake. And now I was an erased paragraph in a story they kept rewriting. I finally let the tears come, but only for a while. Then I got up, I walked to the hall closet and pulled out the gift I had bought a month ago, before the silence. A set of watercolor pencils, high quality, the kind Sarah had once gasped at in a store window. I wrapped them anyway, not because I would be handing them to her, but because I needed to finish the gesture for me. I wrote a card. "Happy birthday, my love. I remember every day of you, whether you remember me or not. Mama." I placed the gift in a drawer, and then I did something strange. I baked a cake, just one layer, simple vanilla, a little messy around the edges. I placed 6 pink candles on top, and I lit them. Then I sat alone at my kitchen table and sang "Happy Birthday" softly. To the air, to the memory, to the space where Sarah used to be. When the candles melted down, I didn't make a wish. I just whispered, "You were worth it every day." The next morning, I walked the package to the mailbox. I stared at it for a long time before placing it inside. I didn't send it. I couldn't bear the idea of it being returned unopened. Instead, I brought it back in and tucked it on the bookshelf behind the old novels I used to read her before bed. I decided that would be her memory box. Quiet, waiting, not in hopes that she would come back, but as proof that I was here, that I had loved, that I had not disappeared. People think heartbreak is loud, but they're wrong. Sometimes it's a birthday party you're not invited to, a silence you wrap in ribbon, and a candle you blow out in the dark. I used to think I'd be buried with Sarah's baby shoes, the tiny pink ones with the frayed Velcro that I had kept in a velvet pouch, like a relic of a time when love was still uncomplicated, when she needed me to help her stand, when I was her beginning. But now they felt like anchors, heavy. So on a rainy afternoon, I brought out the memory box. Not the one I kept on the shelf with framed photos and picture books. The one that sat in my closet beneath a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and years of holding on. I opened it slowly, like I was disarming a mine. Inside were pieces of another life, her hospital bracelet from the day she was born, a lock of hair tied in a blue ribbon, the handprint in clay we made when she turned 3, crooked and uneven, but mine pressed beside hers like we belonged together in permanence. I held it all in my lap, my fingers tracing the past like braille. And then I started sorting, one pile for keeping, one for letting go. It wasn't easy. The first onesie she ever wore at my house, yellow with faded ducks. I kept that, the birthday crown made of cardboard and glitter, into the donation pile. Her old drawings with backward S's and sunflowers with smiling faces. I hesitated, then folded them neatly into a folder. Not because I needed to see them, but because I didn't want to forget her handwriting. I moved carefully, deliberately, as if she might walk in any second and ask me why I was touching her things. But she wouldn't, and the longer I waited for a knock, the more I realized. This was how grief rewrites you, not with grand tragedy, but with the quiet ache of being unneeded. At the bottom of the box was a music box, small, silver. Sarah used to wind it up every night before bed. The tune was broken now, playing only a few tinny notes before trailing into static. Still, I wound it one last time. The first note sang, then silence. It was fitting. I placed the box gently beside the rest, then I pulled out a large suitcase. Not to leave, but to organize. Everything that stayed went inside, not because I was running from it, but because I was no longer living in it. This house had been a shrine long enough. It was time to make it mine again. I cleared the wall of framed pictures, ones where I stood beside Sarah like I had earned that place. I wrapped them in paper and stored them away, not out of bitterness, out of respect, because I wanted to remember her, not haunt her. When I looked up, the room was bare, but it didn't feel empty. It felt open. For the first time in years, the air didn't smell like longing. It smelled like lemon oil and rain and freedom. I made tea and sat by the window. I watched the water trail down the glass like threads being pulled from the sky. And I thought about how I used to imagine Sarah's future. Not the birthday parties or graduation gowns, but the small, everyday things. Her first heartbreak, her favorite poem, her quiet moments where she'd need someone to say, "You're okay, you're enough." I had always assumed that would be me, that I would be her soft place to land. But now I saw someone else would sit in that seat. Maybe not better, just different. And I would have to be okay with that. Because love is not about possession, it's not about legacy. Sometimes it's just the willingness to let someone grow, even if they grow away from you. That night, I lit a candle beside the suitcase. One final ritual. I whispered a prayer, not for reunion, but for release. Then I whispered another, for myself, to keep waking up, to keep painting, to keep being someone, even when no one was watching. Because love that doesn't return is still love. And grief, when honored, becomes grace. It was a Tuesday morning when I did something radical. I made a doctor's appointment. Not because I was sick, but because I hadn't gone in over a year. Not since Hannah took over Sarah's schedule, her schooling, her food, her clothes. And somewhere along the way, my own life blurred behind hers. I hadn't noticed how much I'd stopped tending to myself, how much I had given up to be mama. That wasn't a complaint, it was just the truth. And truths, once spoken, have power. At the clinic, the nurse called out, "Mrs. Davenport?" I blinked. For a split second, I expected Sarah to come running. But there was only me. I stood up. Yes, that's me. It felt like claiming something. After the appointment, I went to the post office. I mailed a package to myself, Sarah's old drawings and one of her birthday candles. Not to forget her, but to mark the moment. It was time I started keeping my own memories again. Then I went to the hair salon. I walked in with a photo I had once saved on my phone. Long ago, before I was raising a child again, when I still cut out clippings of magazines and imagined new versions of myself. "I want this cut," I said. The stylist blinked. "Are you sure? It's pretty short." "Yes," I said, "I'm sure." Hair fell around me like dead leaves. When she spun me toward the mirror, I saw someone I hadn't met in years. Sharp, weathered, but unshaken. I didn't cry. I smiled. On the way home, I stopped at the market. I bought peaches, honey, a bar of soap that smelled like sandalwood and cedar. Things that were just for me, not for lunches or little hands or sticky counters. For once, I didn't check for gluten or dyes or Sarah's preferences. It was a basket full of me. Back home, I did something I hadn't done in a decade. I took out a fresh canvas, and I painted, not a portrait, not a scene, just color. Bold strokes of ochre and crimson and midnight blue. I let my hand move without thinking. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that night, I signed it. Not Mama, not Grandma, just Clara. My name, my whole name. The one I'd forgotten to speak out loud since the day Jason dropped Sarah at my doorstep and said, "Just for a few months, Ma, until we get on our feet." 5 years passed. and I had disappeared between the diaper bags and night feedings and parent-teacher meetings. But not anymore. Now I cooked what I liked. I listened to music without hiding in headphones. I walked to the corner bookstore on Sunday mornings and smiled at the cashier without feeling guilty for being gone too long. Sometimes I still missed Sarah. That wouldn't change, but I stopped waiting for her to return. And I stopped waiting for anyone to hand me permission to exist. One morning, I woke up before the sun. I poured myself coffee, black, strong, just the way I used to like it. Before everything had to be kid-friendly, I stepped outside, barefoot on the porch, wrapped in a robe that smelled like rosewater and pine. And I whispered to no one in particular, "Clara is here." No one answered, but the wind shifted. The sky glowed pale gold. And for the first time in years, the morning felt like a beginning, not just a continuation. I wasn't Sarah's second chance anymore. I was my own. The day of Sarah's birthday came quietly, like a visitor I hadn't invited but knew would arrive anyway. I woke up before dawn. The sky still wore its gray coat, and everything was still, too still, like the world was holding its breath. I didn't check my phone. I already knew it would be empty. No texts, no invitation, no "we changed our minds, please come." This year I wasn't baking the cake. I wasn't stringing up paper lanterns. I wasn't fluffing the tulle skirt of her party dress, or reminding her to say thank you when someone handed her a gift. This year I wasn't part of it at all, and somehow that absence had a weight, heavier than all the balloons I'd ever blown up combined. I walked to the kitchen and made tea, not chamomile. Sarah had never liked the smell. She always wrinkled her nose and asked for peppermint instead, but peppermint wasn't my tea. So I steeped the chamomile, sat by the window, watched the birds pick at the feeder in the yard. And I thought, this is what it means to be uninvited from a life you helped build. Not torn out, not thrown away, just erased. Like you were never there. I let the memory in anyway. The first birthday I ever planned for Sarah had been at the lake. She'd turned 3. We'd baked cupcakes together, her hands clumsy with sprinkles, her cheeks dusted in flour. That day, she hugged me so tight, I thought my ribs would crack. "You're the best," she said. I used to replay that in my mind like a lullaby, but now it played more like a ghost, soft, flickering, unfinished. I didn't know if she remembered that party, or me. I didn't know if she'd think to ask why I wasn't there today. I didn't even know if she'd notice. That's the trick with distance. It builds slowly until it becomes a wall. And when people on the other side stop climbing it, you wonder if it ever mattered to begin with. I got dressed, nothing special. Jeans, a soft sweater, shoes I could walk in for miles. Because that's what I needed, to walk, to move through the weight of this day, before it folded me in half. So I went to the museum, the little one downtown with creaky floors and dust that danced in sunbeams. There I wandered, past oil landscapes and war memorabilia, past fragile pottery and hand-stitched quilts. And then I found it, a portrait, an older woman painted in bold colors, her eyes looking somewhere far off, into grief, into wisdom, maybe both. She reminded me of someone, not me exactly, but someone I might be becoming. There was a small plaque beside her. It read, "Unclaimed but unbroken." I stood there a long time. I thought about all the ways we women disappear, behind children, behind caregiving, behind love so big it swallows us, and how rare it is to reclaim our edges, to say, "I am still here," to say, "I still belong somewhere." even if it's not where I once stood. I bought a postcard of the painting in the gift shop. When I got home, I pinned it to my fridge. Not for Sarah to see, not for anyone else, just for me. That night, I lit a single candle. No cake, no song, just flame. And I whispered her name once, not out of need, but out of love. Then I blew the candle out, not as a farewell, as a benediction, because sometimes the most radical act of love is to stop showing up where you are no longer welcome, and to go where your presence is sacred, even if it's only to yourself. It started with little things. The way Hannah would say thank you with a smile so tight it could cut glass. The way Jason would drop Sarah off late, again, and shrug with a quick, "You know how it is, Ma," before disappearing for another weekend. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into tone, that family had rough edges, but rough edges don't cut unless you press against them too many times. And I had bled enough. There were signs, like the time they offered to take over Sarah's school enrollment. "You've done enough," Hannah said. "We'll handle it now." It sounded generous, but when I asked to see the paperwork, she hesitated. "Why do you need to?" she asked, like curiosity was a crime. Then there was the matter of Sarah's therapy sessions. I'd set them up, paid for them, walked her in, and waited in the parking lot every Thursday. Until one day, Hannah called the office and changed the schedule, then forgot to tell me. I showed up to an empty lobby. "Didn't Jason tell you?" the receptionist asked. No, he hadn't. No one had. Because they'd begun the quiet work of cutting me out. Not with blades, but with omission. And omission is more dangerous than confrontation. It's slower, colder, more final. Eventually, they stopped asking for my help with school pickups, with meals, with anything, until the only thing they still wanted from me was silence and money. It came in coded language. "I know you're still getting Dad's pension," Jason would say with a sheepish look. "Sarah's camp is expensive this year," Hannah would add, lightly, like we were just talking about the weather. It was always for Sarah, always for the good of the family, always accompanied by praise like, "You're so generous," or "We're lucky to have you." But luck doesn't come with ledgers, and generosity isn't real when it's coerced. I began to realize their kindness had strings, invisible at first, then obvious, then choking. They weren't offering inclusion, they were managing my compliance. If I spoke up, I was overstepping. If I stayed silent, I was respected. It was a trap disguised as appreciation. One day, Sarah came home with a new tablet, not a cheap one either. A name-brand screen with bells and whistles I'd never buy, even for myself. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, Dad said you wanted to get it for me," she said simply. My blood ran cold. I hadn't said any such thing, but my silence had apparently said yes for me. That night, I opened my credit card account online. There it was, the purchase, shipped to their address. Jason must have used my card, one I'd let him use once, long ago, for groceries during a rough patch. I'd never canceled it. That was my mistake. But what broke me wasn't the charge, it was the message it sent. I had become a wallet in the shape of a woman. A vault with a pulse. I confronted him. He brushed it off. "It's for Sarah." No apology, just entitlement. I saw something shift in his eyes that night. Not shame, not remorse, but calculation. Like he was assessing how much longer I'd keep playing my part. I left his house that night with shaking hands. Not from fear, from clarity. I had been complicit in my own erasure. Not because I was weak, but because I loved too hard and asked for too little. But I couldn't afford to do that anymore. Because love without boundaries isn't love, it's martyrdom. And martyrdom is how women like me vanish. I didn't vanish that night. I drove home, I poured a glass of water, and I made a list of what was mine, of what I would reclaim, of where their strings would end and where my spine would begin. Kindness without consent is control, and I was done being controlled. There's no elegant way to grieve a relationship that still breathes. You can't light a candle, wear black, and move through rituals when the person who's hurting you is still smiling in photos with your grandchild, so you do it quietly. In the kitchen, where you no longer pack school lunches. In the living room, where no one comes for bedtime stories. In the hallway, where the sound of little footsteps used to echo but now belongs to memory alone. Letting go is not an act, it's a process, a breaking, a peeling, a release. And for me, it started the night I boxed up Sarah's drawings. The ones she'd made me, a house with too many windows, a stick figure with gray hair labeled Nana, a flower with one petal in blue. She said that was her favorite because it felt like me. I held each one like an heirloom, then laid it in the box like a body. Grief, I've learned, is not always loud. Sometimes it's just stillness you didn't choose. I taped the box shut, labeled it simply Sarah, 1st to 5th grade, and I placed it on the highest shelf of my closet, where I wouldn't have to see it every day, but could still reach it, just in case. Then I sat down at my kitchen table, pulled out a notebook, and wrote a letter I never sent. Not to Jason, not to Hannah, to Sarah. My sweet girl, I don't know what you've been told about why I'm not around, but I hope someday you'll remember the mornings I brushed your hair, the evenings I sang you to sleep, the way we used to make pancakes shaped like stars. You were my joy, not my obligation, not my burden. You were the second chance I didn't know I needed. I miss you, but more than that, I hope you're okay. Even if you forget me, I'll always remember the girl who called me her forever Nana. Love me. I didn't sign my name. It didn't feel necessary. She'd know. Or maybe she wouldn't. That's the risk of letting go. You don't always get to be remembered, but you get to be free. And freedom, as I was beginning to learn, was worth more than recognition. It was around that time I started pruning my life, not out of bitterness, out of necessity, old habits, old calendars, old roles. I canceled the subscription to the parenting magazine I'd ordered for myself when I took over Sarah's care, donated the children's books, gave away the booster seat in my car. Each act was a wound and a balm, because that's the duality of liberation. It hurts and heals in equal measure. People asked where Sarah was. I smiled politely and said, "She's with her parents now." Some nodded with sympathy. Others pressed further, waiting for gossip or grief. I gave them neither, because what happened was mine, not a scandal, not a spectacle, just a story that ended quietly, like some stories do. The day I took down Sarah's art from the fridge, I replaced it with a postcard I'd found in the museum, the one of the older woman, painted in defiant color, eyes that dared you to look away. That woman was my anchor now. She reminded me who I could be, even without the title of Nana, even without a seat at the birthday table. I still left Sarah's room untouched. I wasn't ready for that step yet, but I started spending less time looking in, more time looking out. I went to the library, signed up for a pottery class, rejoined the book club I'd quit when Sarah's bedtime overlapped with meetings. At first, I felt guilty. as if joy was betrayal. But then I remembered I wasn't the one who left. I had only ever loved. And love is not shameful, even when it isn't returned. Especially when it isn't returned. Letting go wasn't a betrayal of Sarah, it was a rescue of myself. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I was worth rescuing. There's a kind of silence that follows abandonment. Not the harsh, cutting kind, but a soft, persistent hush. Like someone turned down the volume on your life and forgot to turn it back up. At first, I hated it. The silence was too honest. It echoed every absence, every no-show call, every missed text. But slowly, painfully, I began to hear myself in it. And what I heard wasn't weak. It was steady. It was tired, but unbroken. It was me. That summer, I didn't go to Sarah's birthday party. I wasn't invited, of course. But even if I had been, I wouldn't have gone. Because I'd finally understood something that took me 64 years, and one heartbreak too many to learn. You don't need to sit at a table where your presence is tolerated but not treasured. That day, instead of driving to their house with a gift and a fake smile, I took myself to the ocean. A small beach an hour away, quiet, untouched. I packed a sandwich, a worn-out beach towel, and a copy of a novel I'd been meaning to read for years. I sat on the shore and let the salt wind carry away what I couldn't hold anymore. Sarah's laugh, her missing tooth. The way she used to squeeze my hand 3 times for "I love you." It hurt. God, it hurt. But the wind didn't care. And somehow that helped, because nature doesn't negotiate your worth. It just accepts your presence. I stayed until the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft and bruised. Then I wrote Sarah's name in the sand, not to summon her, but to release her. And when the tide came in and swept it clean, I whispered, "Go well." Not goodbye, just go well. When I got home, I took the invitation I had never received and burned it in my mind, not out of vengeance, but clarity. I would not mourn what had already discarded me. I would grieve it. Yes, but I wouldn't chase it. That's the difference between sorrow and surrender. One is a passage, the other is a prison. Over the next weeks, I gave myself permission to become someone else. Not a grandmother, not a caretaker, just Eleanor. Eleanor who planted tomatoes. Eleanor who took walks at sunset and talked to no one but the birds. Eleanor who went back to therapy, not to fix anything, but to understand why she kept handing her soul to people who didn't know what to do with it. And in those sessions, I unearthed a truth. I had not failed Sarah. I had shown her what unconditional love looked like, that it could come in mismatched socks, pancake mornings, and car rides full of songs off-key, that it could be gentle, that it could be enough, even if one day someone told her otherwise, even if someday she forgot the taste of my hugs or the feel of my fingers brushing her hair, because love leaves traces, not always visible, but never lost. And if she ever needed to remember, all she'd have to do was sit near the ocean and listen. She'd find me there, not in person, but in spirit. Because letting go doesn't mean disappearing. Sometimes it means returning to yourself so fully, no one can take you again, not even the ones you love most. A month after Sarah's birthday, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, not the one near the front door. This one was older, framed in wood that Cliff had carved when we were newly married. For a long time, I avoided that mirror. It reminded me of who I used to be, hopeful, busy, necessary. But on that day, I looked, really looked, and I saw a woman who'd been scraped raw by grief but hadn't bled out. A woman who still woke up every morning and made her own coffee, even if no one else drank it with her. A woman who used to fill lunchboxes and now filled journals. I touched the glass like I was checking to see if she was real. She was. I stood there until the sun shifted and the light caught the silver in my hair. Like lightning bolts, I thought, not soft, electric, and something stirred in me. Something wild, not angry, not sad, something like permission. That afternoon, I walked to the community center and signed up for a watercolor class. Not because I thought I'd be good at it, but because I wanted to make something again. Anything. It was there that I met Grace. She was 81, wore purple nail polish, and said things like, "Grief is just love with nowhere to go." We painted in silence most days, but one afternoon, she said, "You've got the brush grip of someone who used to hold a child's hand." I almost dropped the brush. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She already knew. Somehow, women like us, we know each other. We find one another in the corners of rooms, in the soft sighs, in the way we pour tea or straighten chairs without being asked. We carry invisible histories in our bones. And Grace? She became my first true friend in a long time. Not because she filled the space Sarah left, but because she never tried to. She just stood beside it with me. And we painted, sometimes flowers, sometimes just shapes, sometimes nothing but color that bled across the page like memory. At the end of every class, she'd smile and say, "Still here," and I'd nod, "Still here, still whole," even in the absence. One evening, as I walked home under a sky freckled with stars, I realized something. I hadn't thought about Sarah that day, not with ache, not with longing, just softly, like a song from another room. And that didn't make me cruel, it made me healing, because no love should cost you your entire self, especially not the kind you give freely. That night, I sat at my window and watched the world move. People walking dogs, teenagers on bikes, a couple arguing over takeout orders. Life unapologetic. I sipped my tea and whispered aloud, "I'm not waiting anymore." Not for invitations, not for apologies, not for the past to rewrite itself into something prettier. I wasn't the woman they left behind. I was the woman who stayed, and stayed whole, and found new things to hold, even if they looked nothing like before. It started with a letter, not one I sent, one I wrote just for me, folded carefully into the back of my journal behind the grocery lists and half-finished prayers. I wrote, "You are not what they left behind. You are what remains." I read it every morning for a week, until I didn't need to anymore, until the words sank into my spine and stayed there. By then, Grace and I had started going on weekend trips, small ones. A farmer's market in the next town, a gallery by the coast, once a concert where we were the oldest women in the front row and didn't care. She called it celebrating our stillness in motion. I called it breathing. One Sunday, we stopped by a bookstore, and there, tucked between two thick memoirs, was a children's book I used to read to Sarah. I opened it gently, like it might crumble. The pages smelled like 100 nights of storytelling, of warm laps and sleepy eyes. I almost put it back, but I didn't. I bought it, wrapped it in brown paper, and wrote in looping script, "To Sarah, when you're ready to remember me for more than what I couldn't be." I didn't mail it. I placed it in a wooden box in the back of my closet. Because this wasn't a message for now, it was for the version of her that might exist one day. The one who sees me not as a broken branch, but as the tree that held her. And if that day never comes, Well, that's all right too. Because healing isn't a promise of return, it's a commitment to yourself. The following week, I hosted my first dinner in years. Just 6 people, all older women with stories that cracked the air wide open. One had escaped an abusive marriage at 60. Another had written her first novel at 72. We laughed hard, we cried once, we shared pie and secrets, and no one tried to fix anyone. At the end of the night, one of them touched my shoulder and said, "You built this space." She wasn't talking about the apartment. She was talking about the air between us, the kind you can only breathe when shame is absent, when love has been unhooked from sacrifice. I nodded, smiling. Later, alone in the quiet, I pulled out my old planner, the one I hadn't touched since Sarah's 5th birthday party, the one that had once been filled with school pickups and costume fittings. I flipped to a blank page, and in bold ink I wrote, "Plan my life." Underneath, I listed, learn how to swim, make lemon cake from scratch, take 1 photo every morning, finish a puzzle without giving up, say no faster, say yes slower, forgive myself without needing a reason. Stop pretending I'm waiting for the phone to ring. The next morning, I did the bravest thing I'd done in years. I didn't check my voicemail, not even once. Instead, I made lemon cake. It collapsed in the center, but I ate it anyway. It tasted like freedom. That afternoon, I painted something new, not a flower, not a face, just a single chair by a window. Empty but not lonely, waiting for no one, just being. And in that moment, I understood. I had become the person I needed at the beginning of this story. Not a grandmother desperate to be seen. Not a woman defined by what was taken, but a soul who stayed standing, who rerouted herself after the storm, who learned that love, when turned inward, doesn't shrink. It expands. By sunset, I returned to the mirror, looked again. There she was. Ruth, just Ruth, enough. And with that, I stepped outside into a world I no longer needed permission to belong to.